United States has this ideal that we are a land of immigrants. We don't fulfill that ideal, but that's our self-conception. That's how we celebrate ourselves.
How open is Taiwan really towards asylum seekers?
There is no refugee law in Taiwan, so there is no legal basis for individual asylum seeker to arrive in Taiwan.
Taiwan's uniquely traumatic history makes many different sides unable to embrace asylum.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Now, Taiwan has been named as the only open country in Asia in a recent report by a leading global civil society alliance. But how open is it to those who are targeted, persecuted, and forced to leave their homeland? Like many other countries in the world, Taiwan doesn't have a dedicated law on asylum seekers, but it does have refugees who arrive here seeking security. So what happens to those who end up here? And why is it that so many of the world's richest countries have closed their doors to those who need help most? For this discussion, we welcome Michelle Kuo, a writer, human rights lawyer, and visiting lecturer at National Cheng Chi University in Taipei, and Leah Lin, Executive Director of the Asia Citizen Future Association. Thank you both so much for being part of this conversation. I'm going to start with you, Michelle, and ask you to give us a little bit of background on the work you've done with asylum seekers.
I helped detained migrants apply for asylum when under Trump. So as a lawyer, I worked in the Carnes Detention Center in rural Texas, and I helped person after person apply for asylum. And this was right during the same summer that families were being separated at the border. So I met fathers who had just been reunited with their sons after 2 months of being separated. They were totally traumatized. You know, the sons would cling on to their fathers. It was an all-male facility, so it was mostly fathers, sons. And it was deeply moving. I met asylum seekers from Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. And each person had a story of persecution that they were escaping. Often it was gang violence, but it was also things such as police abuse.
I want to take it now to Leah and ask you first. Your organization studies the nature of civic space, which was used as a basis for the report that we mentioned at the beginning of this program. But how open is Taiwan really towards asylum seekers?
I think we need to separate the subject. For example, for organization, currently Taiwan is not very open to asylum-seeking organization to register in Taiwan. So you can read our report. We scrutinize the legal framework and also scrutinize the regulation and our health insurance, taxation, and etc. So for organization, it's not very open right now. And for individual asylum seeker, as you can see, there is no legal framework and no refugee law in Taiwan. So there is no legal basis for individual asylum seeker to arrive in Taiwan. However, the reality is that there are still many asylum seekers will travel to Taiwan. So basically, we can separate into two different categories. One is Chinese, Hong Konger, and Macau citizens, and the second is asylum seeker from around the world. So they will face very different treatment.
And again, I want to dig into those details a little further in this program. But before we do that, let's take a look at the current situation in Taiwan with regards to legislation. A Refugee Act was put before Taiwan's legislature in 2005. Now, over the years, legislators discussed and drafted asylum laws, but a concrete bill is yet to materialize. Yen Rong Lai, a refugee specialist at Taiwan Association for Human Rights, explains why this bill has been waiting 18 years to become law.
I think one of the reasons is that the refugee issue is not the issue that the mainstream society care about, and also because refugee, they don't have a legal status and they don't have the right to vote. So I think a lot of the push for the government to establish certain law is most of the time is because of the elections. So if the the society care about like certain issue, there might be a huge push for the government to pass the law. But for the refugee issue, it's hard to like generate this kind of push.
How much talk is there of enacting a refugee act or a pathway for asylum seekers in this current political climate?
When it comes to asylum seeker from China, I think it will definitely let the mainstream society have some kind of anxiety and maybe has some hostility against the asylum seekers from China. So I think this is a very big issue that the human rights organization, civil society, and also the government, when we are dealing with passing the refugee law and other mechanisms, where we will definitely face a big black opposition from the society.
Yeah, so Michelle, you did touch on this very earlier, but I do want to talk a little bit more about this. How concerned are you that populism and anti-immigration sentiment are becoming part of the political decision-making we're seeing not just here, but across the globe?
Well, what's totally fascinating to me as I think about asylum law in Taiwan, because I come from this outsider perspective, is how I'm fascinated about how Taiwan's uniquely traumatic history makes many different sides unable to embrace asylum. Because when you think about it, the United States has this ideal that we are a land of immigrants. We don't fulfill that ideal, but that's our self-conception. That's how we celebrate ourselves. If you look at the European countries, they all know that asylum law emerged because Jewish refugees were turned away and sent back to their concentration camps. Same with the United States. So what's so fascinating to me is that Taiwan doesn't have a coherent public narrative. In fact, there were 2 million Chinese refugees, right? That's our history. It's a traumatic influx. And then you see overseas Chinese refugees, basically 7,000 KMT soldiers in Burma in 1953. They're relocated to Taiwan. They are basically refugees, right? They're soldiers who have been relocated from one place to another, and they're migrants, and that's where little Burma is. So what's so fascinating to me is that because there's no conception of ourselves as a refugee country, because that would go against the whole narrative that Taiwan, of the KMT, that we're a familial nation, right? That would violate their idea that they have a right to claim Taiwan. Meanwhile, you have the progressives who genuinely remember a huge influx of refugees and how that this caused havoc. And so this creates an uncomfortable nativist sentiment towards immigration, I think, and that gets passed down. But that also is suppressed because we do have this newer multicultural vision. And so I think part of Taiwan's problem is we don't have a coherent public narrative of ourselves that we aspire to, as Europe and the United States do.
Let me just bring Leah in right now. Is like, how much public discourse is there really about refugees and asylum seekers, given Taiwan's history, as Michelle has pointed out?
I think, as you just mentioned in the beginning of the show, the asylum seeking bill is brought into our legislative yuan in 2005. So it takes almost nearly 20 years for this bill to come true, but we still doesn't see it will be passed in the coming new legislative yuan. So this topic is very cared of by the human rights organization and human rights activists. And we will work with the administrative system, for example, some civil servants, and also we will do advocacy to the legislative yuan and legislator and also the political party to enhance their willing to increase their political will to pass this law. However, there are, as I shared earlier, the China factor will be a very big elements or issues that will stop a lot of different stakeholders to pass the law. So for the asylum seeking legislation, from my point of view, personally, I think it will only raise when we see for example, the Hong Kong situation and some other social movement happen around Taiwan.
Given that, I want you to take a look at this. While politicians in Taiwan may be on the fence, this survey shows that people here may be more open to having legislation to accommodate refugees and asylum seekers. Kristina Kirongska from the Central European Institute of Asian Studies explains her survey's findings.
And let me also tell you about the research we have done at the Palatka University Olomouc, a large-scale survey in Taiwan where we asked specifically about a potential asylum law in Taiwan. And the question whether it would be costly for Taiwan, so many people agreed and were quite worried about it. On the other hand, most of the respondents, and I emphasize that this is a nationally representative survey, so most of the respondents actually felt that Taiwan should pass an asylum law because this would also help Taiwan differentiate itself from China and show that it's a responsible international actor when it comes to human rights.
So, Leah, then what do you make of that final thought she had about Taiwan wanting to differentiate itself from China, and therefore this is one way of doing that? Is that really the sentiment we're seeing here?
Yes, our government, the DPP government, trying very hard to build up the human rights environment in Taiwan. And you can see in our government, we always have the statement that Taiwan enshrine human rights, we respect the rule of law, and we are a democracy country. But however, if you see deeper in our, like I said, the legislation, the law, the administrative regulation, and also in our government department, you have found that inside the government, they still lack the understanding of human rights, and also about the refugee issue, they lack the idea and understanding of the non-refoulement, and also they do not really understand what is the positive obligations that a state should take and a state should contribute. So there is still a big gap from the statement and the reality.
Okay. Michelle, when it comes to pushback against asylum seekers, what are the most common reasons you hear, particularly in somewhere like the US, which, as you said, defines itself as a land made of immigrants?
The most common pushback I'd receive from people of all backgrounds, sometimes second or third generation immigrants, both Asian and Latino, was I didn't cut in line and they're cutting in line. And I always have my students think about what that means, to cut in line and not to cut in line, because the law says that every person can apply for asylum. That's the law that most countries have domesticated from international human rights law. And every person's case is going to undergo an asylum judge. That's the most common thing, I think, this idea that people are somehow evading the legal process. And then also they're often surprised when they hear that people are paying taxes while they're working, even if they're using a different ID.
Let me get Leah to jump in and answer your question about strategy. Are activists changing their strategy to bring attention to the fact that Taiwan does not have a dedicated asylum bill?
Yeah, from the perspective of ACAFA, Asia Citizen Future Association, my organization, we are trying to build up the environment to more friendly for organizations from Southeast Asia who are targeted by the governments or targeted by other stakeholders. So we are trying to raise the awareness and understanding for, first, the civil society organization in Taiwan, and also the legislative yuan and our political party, to enhance their understanding about what's going on in Southeast Asia in terms of civic space. So we are currently building up a Taiwan and Southeast Asia Civil Society Week, which we bring experts and NGO and activists from Southeast Asia to Taiwan every year to have a deeper communication and dialogue on how can we work together, collaborate together to defend our civic space. So in this week, we will also bring NGOs in Taiwan, INGO around the world, and also politician and political party, and also MOFA Taiwan into these dialogues to seek what we can collaborate with each other, and how can we build up and how can we create a more friendly environment. We call it civic space in Taiwan. So I think this is very important. Like, I want to echo Michelle and the Taiwan Association for Human Rights that we need to raise the understanding and awareness in the broader society not only within civil society. So because we are living in a democracy country, so if people, this is also the shortage of democracy's political system. If you don't have the vote, if you are not a citizen, maybe the politician, maybe the legislative yuan will kind of ignore your ideas and your demands. So we are trying to enhance the understanding of Taiwan's society and civil society, and we are trying to connect local legislation with the development of our regional democracy movements.
So given that, I want to take you to another part of the survey from Christina Kironska. She polled sentiment towards refugees from different regions, and she found that although there's reluctance in Taiwan to accept potential refugees from China, over 60% of those surveyed were willing to accept refugees from its special administrative region of Hong Kong. So, Michelle, there was a lot of empathy for people in Hong Kong, particularly during the protests and then after Hong Kong installed the national security law. So how much of a factor is, and part of that reason is because Taiwan's people could identify with what Hong Kong people were going through due to that powerful neighbor China. So how much of a factor is this whole idea of familiarity and being able to understand their issues when it comes to being granted asylum?
Thanks so much for that question. The Hong Kong question is really interesting to me because there's a lot of resentment among some Hong Kongers towards Thai because the Hong Kong movement helped get her elected, and the crackdown in Hong Kong over the national security law helped fuel her numbers because people don't want another Hong Kong. And yet, the government, as with all asylum cases, has not been transparent, is secretive, does things on a case-by-case basis, doesn't even release information when they offer the equivalent of asylum, which isn't asylum, it's like a temporary residence permit that they can hopefully creates a pathway, but it's not asylum. And I think the slowness really frustrates Hong Kongers, and I'm on their side. I do want to articulate that I think there is a generational divide over the Hong Kongers. Like if you talk to this younger generation, they're 100% for Hong Kongers. But their parents' generation remembers the Hong Kong boss, Everybody talks about having a Hong Kong boss, by which they're referring to the fact that Hong Kong had a lot more economic power and treated Taiwan as a poor country, which it was. So I think that is some of the texturedness behind this reluctance to embrace Hong Kongers, even though I support, obviously, giving the right of asylum to people escaping political persecution.
Right, and I want to bring your attention to this story here. In 2019, many Hong Kongers fearing arrest fled to Taiwan, but few actually were able to settle here.
Christmas away from home and family. Hong Konger Taiwans Law moved to Taipei to escape the government crackdown on pro-democracy activists.
Hong Kong police knocked my door when it's 6 a.m. in the morning and I'm still sleeping. And luckily they don't immediately arrest me.
Hong Konger Taiwans Law moved to Taipei to escape the government crackdown on pro-democracy activists.
One of my job back to 2019 is that to support those students who are being arrested by the Hong Kong police force. We will send a lawyer as soon as possible to the police station where he has been arrested.
Law was able to receive an asylum-like protection within the Hong Kong Humanitarian Aid Project, a special case system Taiwan established in response to the influx of Hong Kong activists following the 2019 pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong.
We receive a lot of threats, life threats, freedom threats, some people sending knives to the student unions and they're sending warning letters.
But he was one of the few Hong Kongers who was given an avenue to stay in Taiwan. His case is seen as unusual in a country that doesn't have a legal framework for granting asylum.
So during the 2019 protests, there were episodes of people who felt very much unsafe and they would just buy an air ticket and came right away.
Leung Kai-chi recently relocated to Taiwan from Hong Kong. As a visiting researcher, he is helping establish a hub for Hong Kong studies at Academia Sinica in Taipei. He explains the government's dilemma in dealing with exiled Hong Kongers.
The government essentially doesn't really know what to do with them. So for a period of time, they were essentially channeled into existing programs. So forcing them to go through the original channel doesn't make a whole lot of sense to them.
A draft asylum law was proposed by the Ministry of the Interior in 2005, but has never been implemented. One of the key sticking points is whether people from China, including Macau and Hong Kong, should be given right to seek refuge in Taiwan.
After national security law, and especially right now, there is less and less activists in Hong Kong right now. So Taiwan government seems don't have the willing to receive that much refugee.
Law's life has become a testament to the civil liberties he cherishes. From the flags he displays in his apartment to the books he reads, or to his outspoken concern for his fellow Hong Kongers who face the possibility of arrest daily just for expressing themselves. His hope is that one day they too will be able to live with the freedoms he now can enjoy in Taiwan. With Siwing Lin and Alexander Shin, Shubhampal for Connected.
So off the back of that, I'll take it to you, Leah. Can you explain the special case created for Hong Kongers and why it's now becoming more difficult for persecuted Hong Kongers to come to Taiwan?
So we can see because there is no refugee law, and even if they have refugee law, they are not. The Hong Kong people cannot use the refugee law because it's totally different system, because they are previously ROC citizens in our very special, unique and weird constitutions. So for we can see in the Hong Kong activists, they move to Taiwan and they need to settle down and have the legal right to enjoy the civic space, and can settle down in Taiwan. However, we can see there is no mechanism, so the government very rely on the civil society and some specific human rights organization or organization who are focused on legal environment to help the Hong Kong activists to settle down. And we can see the civil society play a very vital role inside the whole procedure.
Given that environment, and you talk about civil society being involved, would you say that there are some groups that are more likely to get asylum in Taiwan or more accepted than other groups?
I think in Taiwan, as you can see, civil society has their specific roles. So some of them provide legal aid, some of them are focusing on asylum seeking cases. So this kind of organization, they have more obligation and more wills to engage in these cases. So they also have the professionals to provide the legal support to the Hong Kong activists.
Okay, let me take it to Michelle then. Would you say that there are some groups that are more likely, I mean, anywhere you go, some groups that are more likely to be accepted as refugees or asylum seekers than others? And what is it that usually defines a group that's more likely to be integrated into society?
Well, I'll just say that in the U.S. during the Cold War, anybody, who proclaims to be an anti-communist, from Hungary, from Cuba, would be very likely to be granted asylum. For a certain period of time, Christians in some Middle Eastern countries would be more likely to get asylum. So it really depends on the different country. Taiwan is interesting. I would have to defer to the statisticians to say which groups people are more willing to accept. Because, for instance, Hong Kong seems like a no-brainer to me. And yet, for the reasons I articulated, this resentment about the economic power, the memory of having been a lesser country to Hong Kong, it creates a kind of reluctance.
Okay, in that case, let me kind of turn this question around a little bit. Does having, and this is more a general question globally as opposed to just Taiwan, but does having a formal asylum framework immediately translate into a system that is fair and protects people seeking refuge?
In the Taiwan case, absolutely. This sounds so obvious to say, but I think it's helpful just to think about. When you create a system of law, you create a whole series of regulations. You create a paper trail. So every single one of those Hong Kongers or Tibetans or a Chinese dissident would have a chance to state his case. When you create a paper trail, you have the right to appeal. You have lawyers then who are looking at your case. You have reporters who then can write very quickly about your case. You create a whole transparency, and you create a public narrative that might be really sympathetic. You also force a judge to articulate his denial. Even if he's denying every single person, now that's all on paper. So everything that's been happening right now, even there's a roughly 100 or so Hong Kongers who people say are basically were given de facto asylum, we don't know anything about them. How is the public going to care about refugees if they don't even know a face and a name and a story? That's how people come to care. That being said, asylum itself is a really corrupt, system. I mean, it's really random in the U.S. It depends on what judge you get, what lawyer you get, what city you're in. It's not what I would call a coherent legal system.
Right, and it's definitely a conversation that we all should be having given the geopolitics we're seeing in the world right now. Thank you both so much, Michelle Kuo and Leah Lin, for your thoughts and your time. And with that, we come to the end of the program. And to our viewers everywhere, it has been so good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, please join the conversation on our social media. Remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.